to get started. And just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I'm Lorraine Hightower.
And I'm Melissa Minnick. Lorraine and I were lucky enough to travel together to Atlanta for this year's International Dyslexia Association conference.
And we learned so much, and we wanted to present to you tonight our top 5 takeaways. And then we're going to answer your questions live. That's always our favorite part of the evening. So we are recording this session. I want to give that disclaimer. So if you are asking a question, please keep that in mind. And if you think of something as we're presenting our top 5 takeaways, you can write your question in the chat, and then Melissa's going to pull it for us at the end of the presentation. So we look forward to diving into everything that's on top of mind for our attendees. And before we jump into the takeaways from the conference, I want to talk just briefly about what DyslexiaCon actually is. Every year, the International Dyslexia Conference brings together teachers and administrators, researchers, advocates, families from all over the world. And it's about a 3-day deep dive into dyslexia, into the science of reading, into effective intervention and what that should look like, as well as options for remediation. And this year's conference was packed with a lot of new research. We had many powerful conversations, and even an updated definition of dyslexia was presented.
And you can see us here in this picture from the conference, along with our friends from the Reading Language Learning Center and Decoding Dyslexia. The dyslexia community is a great one to be a part of.
And our first takeaway that we want to really emphasize is that language struggles can signal dyslexia. One of the biggest insights from the conference, and this was shared over and over, was the strong link between oral language and dyslexia. Dr. Charles Hume from Oxford University shared research showing difficulties with spoken language and how they often show up long before reading problems appear. And I know that was true with my own son many, many years ago. And when people think of dyslexia, they often think that it is just a reading disorder. But my team and I, and the International Dyslexia Association, we want to make it abundantly clear to all of you, as well as to the general public, that dyslexia is a language disorder. And it is critically important that parents are listening to how children are using sounds and language when they're speaking, that you're listening to hear if your children are mixing up the sounds in words or if they're actually having difficulty expressing their ideas, listening to how they are using grammar, and really being on the lookout for how they understand spoken language from a very young age as well.
And if you're noticing struggles or delays in those areas, don't brush them off or wait for your child to grow out of those ways of speaking because these challenges are powerful early warning signs. And when we identify them early and we take action, we can change a child's reading trajectory long before it becomes a struggle.
Yes, and as Melissa said, if you are seeing any of these signs, we highly recommend that parents request a comprehensive speech and language evaluation through their public school system. And you can request it because you suspect a language-based disability. An evaluation will give you as parents clarity on whether or not your child does have some areas of concern, and peace of mind if the evaluation shows that they don't have any areas of concern. It will also help you understand whether or not your child would benefit from support now at a earlier age, well before any of those reading delays show up. Takeaway number 2 is about how the general education reading programs in all of our schools are being implemented across the country. Structured literacy has become a bit of a buzzwords, I will say, and structured literacy legislation is truly one of the best things that is happening in education right now. It is moving schools in the right direction in terms of English language arts. But at the conference, we heard a critical caution that confirmed what we see every day in our IEP meetings across the state of Virginia, and that is that general education, these are for all students in general education classes where they're using structured literacy programs, they are not automatically the right fit or appropriate for students who have, disabilities, even if they are considered, with the air quotes, evidence-based or based on the science of reading. And many districts are using these general education structured literacy programs as if they do meet everyone's needs because these curriculums contain these buzzwords. But for students who have dyslexia, these general education programs are often not enough. They usually need instruction that is much more intensive, more explicit, that is tailored specifically to them and their areas of deficits. And this is very important for parents to understand. So while these new laws are absolutely a step forward, they do not replace the need for an IEP that reflects, your child's unique learning profile and needs, and not just what is available and working for all students.
Takeaway number three is that reading isn't a solo skill. And when we say it isn't a solo skill, what we really mean is that literacy has a lot of moving parts that work together. In strong classroom, instruction doesn't just stop at phonics or decoding. Instead, kids learn all parts of language to build strong literacy skills. So, for instance, they are systematically and explicitly taught the meaning behind words and parts of words, also known as morphology. They'll
Yes.
learn things like prefixes, roots, suffixes, so they can figure out unfamiliar words and build a robust vocabulary at the same time. Classrooms that teach literacy also include direct and explicit instruction in sentence structure and grammar. Successful literacy teachers are showing kids how language works, how words fit together, and how to make sense of what they read. And these language skills will not only build strong readers, but also strong speakers and strong writers.
And takeaway number four encourages us to take a new look at inclusion and least restrictive environment, or what is often referred to as LRE. Inclusion gives students who have disabilities some wonderful opportunities, and we certainly understand that. But at DyslexiaCon, we were reminded that for students with learning disabilities like dyslexia, inclusion alone is not going to guarantee academic progress or necessarily close any gaps. And Dr. Doug Fuchs, who shared his review of over 50 years of research, confirmed that where a child is taught, such as in a general education classroom or in a pull-out setting, is not what drives outcomes or progress. Instead, what he shared and all of his research confirmed is that what matters most is how these students are taught. And students who have multi-year literacy gaps often require intensive, small group, or even pull-out instruction so that they can catch up. And when we talk about LRE, or the least restrictive environment, we need to focus on the environment that is actually meeting the child's learning needs and not just the physical placement of where are they going to be in the school. And we really want to focus, and we want to encourage you to focus your placement decisions on how your child is being taught, meaning what is the methodology that's being used as opposed to where is your child being taught these skills.
One of the biggest announcements at DyslexiaCon was the release of the updated 2025 definition of dyslexia. This new definition is definitely a long one, but that's because it reflects the full complexity of dyslexia. It recognizes that dyslexia is shaped by genetic, neurobiological, and environmental factors working together. It also makes it clear that dyslexia is much more than a simple reading disorder. It can involve how children process the sounds of language, how they understand and use word parts, and even how they spell. The definition highlights that oral language weaknesses can be important early signs, just like we discussed earlier tonight. And finally, it acknowledges the ripple effects that dyslexia can have on comprehension, vocabulary development, written expression, and definitely emotional well being. This broader view helps families and schools understand that dyslexia reaches far beyond a single reading skill and that support needs to reflect the whole picture.
And one of the most powerful parts, and why we're really excited about this new definition, is how much it actually strengthens parents' advocacy. And I say that because the definition mentions phonological and morphological processing. So parents can now ask for evaluations that look at both sound based skills and word structure skills. And parents can feel confident making sure that oral language testing, speech language testing is also included, since this definition from IDA clearly identifies early language weaknesses as signs of risk of dyslexia. And another key phrase in the definition that we want to highlight is the phrase that says difficulties that persist despite effective instruction. So if your child is not making progress, even with interventions such as maybe they're receiving what's called MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, or they're getting informal, pull-out groups in or outside of their general education classroom, that lack of progress is really important evidence. And this definition should support you in sharing that information with your school team when you are advocating for more help or even requesting an evaluation for your child because you suspect that what's in place is not working. So before we move on, and I know we're coming at you like a fire hose, but we want to spend most of our time tonight answering your questions. That's what our community tells us they value the most. I want to just, pause here for a second and ask you to just reflect on these top 5 takeaways that we reviewed and think about, what is for your child, how do you think they're doing? When we talk about all of these pieces, has language really been considered for your child? So Melissa's going to take you through some guiding questions here, but our purpose in sharing the takeaways is for parents to have awareness about what IDA is seeing, what they're communicating, and for you right now in this brief moment to go, that's happening for my child, or that's not happening for my child. So Melissa, why don't you take them through some of these guiding questions that can help them reflect?
Yeah, I'd like to take you a little bit deeper if your child has an IEP. So, these questions are just going to help you reflect a little bit more about the IEP itself. So, ask yourself, is your child's reading instruction addressing all parts of literacy, like decoding, morphology, vocabulary, syntax, and comprehension? Or does it feel like one piece of the puzzle is being supported while the others are just kind of left dangling? Does the IEP include goals for spelling and writing? Because remember, that new definition of dyslexia makes it clear that dyslexia affects far more than decoding alone. If your child has any oral language challenges, are speech and language services included in your child's IEP? And if they are those services strong enough and aligned with the concerns you have? Is the instruction your child receives truly individualized? Or does it feel more like a general education program that's just been given to everyone? And finally, is the current placement the place where your child learns best? Not just what's convenient, not what works for most kids, but what actually helps your child make meaningful progress. These questions are not meant to overwhelm you, they're meant to empower you. Because once you can see where the gaps are, then you can start to fill them. And once you know what's missing, you can advocate with more clarity and confidence.
Yeah, thank you for those questions, Melissa. And
Yeah.
we know that sometimes when we share questions like this with parents, these reflections will bring up instant clarity, like you said, like, oh no, my child doesn't have a vocabulary goal and they really need that.
Yep.
And sometimes they will bring up even more questions, and sometimes they will shine a light on places where your child's IEP is not, fully meeting all of their needs. So if you were listening tonight and you found yourself wondering whether your child is truly getting everything they need in school, we always want to say whenever we speak to a community that you do not have to figure this out on your own. We are here to help. We've worked with hundreds and hundreds of parents over the last 10 years. And one of the special offerings that we have this month, and again, we're going to do your Q&A, so please don't go anywhere. We want to answer all of your burning questions. But our hearts are really being called to serve parents because we're hearing from a lot of parents who are struggling right now, and they have concerns about what's happening at the federal level. They have concerns about what's happening with English language arts and what curriculums are taking place. And so if you are a parent and your child has an IEP and you are wondering, like, is my child's IEP truly meeting all of their needs? We are offering just over Black Friday weekend a IEP audit special. And this is available. It's going to be available to the general public for Black Friday weekend for $97. But because you are here tonight, you actually get first grabs at my calendar, and we only have a limited number of spots. So you
Great.
can take a picture of the QR code, or you can, use it now to access it. But you can use this QR code to get on our calendar. And the important thing about an IEP audit, as I said, we don't offer this year round. It's just something we're offering for Black Friday weekend. But we did do it a couple of years ago, and parents absolutely loved it because it includes a careful review of your child's IEP. Then I spend 60 minutes with you live in a consultation setting, and I will actually give you personalized recommendations on any red flags that I see about the IEP, what I believe you should focus on, what I recommend you should talk with the school team and the IEP team about. And families have told us that they walk away with a much clearer picture of why the IEP isn't, they always have a hunch. I knew something was off. I didn't know exactly what it was, or, how can I get more added to the IEP? So they leave conversations like this with a clear picture of how to advocate for their child and also some peace of mind. So if this sounds like an opportunity that would benefit you and your family, go ahead and grab that code. And as I said, it'll take you right to my calendar. And then you can have access before everybody else because we're not sharing it until Black Friday weekend rolls around. Um, all right, let me move here. And if you're here and your child doesn't have an IEP, we wanted to just remind you that all year long, we do offer a complimentary discovery call. My team and I really do want to serve the dyslexia community and be helpful in whatever way that we can. So we offer complimentary discovery calls. It's about 20 minutes. It's with a member of my team. And for any reason, obviously we serve the dyslexic community. So we are hoping to provide resources, help, support, and we'll let you know if we think there's something that you're struggling with that we could help make a difference in. So that's the QR code for the discovery calls. But I do want to jump, Melissa, into the Q&A.
Yes,
I
it is
know.
time.
Okay, good. That, as we said, is
Wonderful.
our favorite part of the whole evening. So I
Yes.
don't know if we have any questions in the Q&A. I know we got some in
Yeah.
advance. You told me some people emailed
Yep, we
you or
do have a
something.
few. And we do have a question here.
Yeah.
So here's the question. If a
Mhm.
child was at risk with dibbles and pulled out for an intervention, how long should that intervention be in place to know if it's working without the need for a special education evaluation process?
So if the child is at risk and being
Hmm.
pulled out for some type of an intervention, which to me is basically saying they're doing some MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, right? How they're wondering how long does that need to be in place before an
Hmm.
evaluation? Do I have it right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, so I want to definitely say the short answer is it doesn't have to be in place at all. You can actually request an
Hmm.
evaluation because you suspect a specific learning disability. There's been federal guidance that says that school teams cannot use RTI, response to intervention, or MTSS, multi-tiered systems of supports, as a way to avoid or prevent a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation. But yes, so it's, on the one hand, it's good that they're doing something, right, for your child, but that should not be an excuse for why, if you've asked or if you're planning to ask for a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation, they shouldn't refuse that because they're doing something on the side based on those DIBEL results or because they think your child's struggling. So,
Yeah.
if that were me, I would basically say to the school team, I appreciate that you're doing the dibbles or you've got that in place to see how my child responds at the same time, because I suspect a language based or a specific learning disability, I am asking for a full and comprehensive evaluation of my child. It's definitely your right to do so. And as I said, under the federal IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there is what's called a child find obligation. And child find is something many parents don't know about, but it's an obligation on school districts to locate, to evaluate, and identify students who have special education needs. So, sometimes we will suggest to parents if you're getting, any kind of resistance from the school team on doing an evaluation, ask them to explain to you how their refusal of evaluating your child meets the child find obligation under IDEA.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah, I think that's
helpful.
really important for parents to understand is that those informal interventions can happen in tandem with an evaluation. Get that special education process started because it takes so long.
Yes.
And then, yeah, while they're getting that informal intervention.
Yeah.
Great. We got another question here.
Oh,
So,
I just want to say, Melissa,
oh, yeah.
when you say it takes so long, parents often don't realize that in different states across the country, that can be anywhere from 65 to 80 business days. And that's a
Yeah.
lot, that's months when we're talking about and evaluating a child.
Right. Absolutely. So thank you. We've got another question here. So if you're with us, please add your questions to the Q&A, and we'll just keep reading them off here. So this next person asks, I know I can ask for an evaluation at any time, though asking how long to give it to know if RTI is working. So this is the same person,
Oh,
a
same
follow-up
person. Okay,
question.
sure. So you know you can get an evaluation and you're wondering like what's a reasonable amount of time. Okay, I understand. Um, well, I can't help it. I have to say I would want to know what are they doing. Um, to answer your question, so you can put that out of your mind, I'm going to say about 8 to 9 weeks. You know, maybe six, depending upon what skills they're working on, but really about 8 to 9 weeks to give them a fair opportunity. I would say about a quarter, right? If it's a quarter system, give them, 8 to 9 weeks to see what their data is showing in terms of meaningful progress. But I started off, and what I want to kind of end this question with is rather than how long to give them, what you want to know is what are they actually doing?
Mhm.
Because DIBELS is a good assessment. It's a good skill assessment, and it often does, identify red flags for kids who have dyslexia. So what I would really want to know is what type of intervention are you giving my child? And maybe you do know that during this, 8 to 9 weeks. And hopefully it is something that's multisensory, based on structured literacy, with a defined scope and sequence using an Orton-Gillingham approach. And it's in either a very small group or, in some most severe cases with a student, they usually don't do this under the MTSS model, but it can even be done one-on-one. But what you really want to know is what are you doing? And then I would also put that back on the school district and say, in your opinion, what is a reasonable amount of time before I can expect my child to start showing progress with this intervention? And see what they say. But
Yeah.
don't forget that you can also, get that evaluation. And we often do recommend that parents pursue this in parallel
Mhm.
because 9 weeks as a goes by really fast. And as Melissa and I were just saying, these evaluations can take, um, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 months to get done.
Yeah. Yep. And if you suspect a learning disability at all, that's the impetus to go ahead and
Right.
get that evaluation regardless of what's happening at the school.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure.
So we have another question here. My child has had a speech and language IEP since preschool,
Hmm.
but the school keeps telling me it's separate from her reading difficulties.
Hmm.
After hearing the information, how do I explain the connection between my child's speech issues and their reading difficulties to my IEP team so that they can get reading services?
Okay, that's a lot. So I'm,
It is. It
I
is.
think I heard you say, Melissa, there's a speech and language IEP since preschool.
That's
So
right.
they have an IEP and they want to know how can they really separate speech from reading or make sure the IEP team is focusing on reading. Is that right?
Right, because I think the school team is separating speech from reading, and we're really seeing that connection. And she wants
Okay.
to make that connection with the team so that
Okay.
way reading services can be implemented.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense to me. Well, first and foremost, we want this parent to know that if her child already has an IEP, so even if that child was found eligible under speech language as the classification, the IEP has to address all of the child's needs, whether
Mhm.
they be in reading or math or content areas that the child's not making progress in. So that's the first point that I want to make. And then secondly, if the school team is not seeing that the student has needs in the area of reading, that parent can start collecting both formal and informal data to help the IEP team see what she sees, right? So I would be asking this parent, when you watch your child in reading, are there um, like is it sounds and letter challenges? I don't know how old the child is that she said
Yeah.
preschool, so it could be phonemic awareness concerns, it could be decoding of words that the child can't decode the words, could be fluency, could be comprehension. You want to think about as a parent, what area of reading do I believe my IEP team needs to know about? And then you can bring informal data, like whether that's recording your child reading, or maybe you have report card data, or you've had a teacher conference where the teacher has said, your child reads really slowly, they skip words, they omit words, or maybe you have more formal data from, maybe the district has like a literacy screener or something that shows your child has significant gaps compared to same age peers. And so, there's a lot of different tools available, formal and informal, that parents can use. And if you don't have them, you can request them of the IEP team. You can say, I would like to do some literacy skill checks in the areas of phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, comprehension, because I believe my child has needs in those areas. And IEP teams are required to do these skill assessments and additional formal assessments if the parent believes the child has certain academic or functional needs. So they don't just get to tell you no. And I think that's something that parents don't always realize. If they do, of course, because we do see this every day, some school teams do actually just say no. And you want to get their no documented in a prior written notice. That's part of an IEP team meeting where they're actually, this is what the parent asked for. They're documenting their refusal to do that, and they're supposed to include their rationale. But I will say the majority of IEP teams, if a parent says, I have suspicions about reading, they're pretty receptive to doing a deeper dive to see. And if they find that there are gaps in that area, they should absolutely be folding them in to the IEP under academic needs, driving, that will drive to a goal conversation and then services and accommodations. So
Yeah.
I
And,
hope that
I
was
would just
helpful.
add to that too, what we said earlier tonight, which is we have this lovely new IDA dyslexia definition that clearly outlines the connection between oral language skills and dyslexia. And so bringing that definition with you and just sharing it with the team because they don't know what they don't know and they may not have seen that definition yet. It is brand new. So sharing that might be a helpful tool as well.
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you for
Yeah.
adding that. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, sure. And I just want to thank you guys again for participating, adding your questions into the Q&A. It makes this so much fun. Like we're getting to know you guys. So,
And
keep
showing up
adding your
live.
questions.
I know
That's
it's
right.
not easy to show up live on the end of a work day or a school. Yeah.
That's right. So we want to have some fun with you guys. So thank you to this parent who was completely frank and said, "I am so overwhelmed." She
Okay.
says, or I assume she, I don't know. My child is reading below grade level, but was recently denied special education services. What do I do?
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So, reading below grade level denied special education services. Well,
yeah.
without knowing a lot more, what I would say in response to that is it sounds like there is a gap. That child's not meeting, expected age or grade level expectations. But somehow the team didn't think the gap was significant enough or there was an adverse impact. But they had to do evaluations to get to that point. So one thing that I would be really curious about would be obviously looking at those evaluations if I was the parent to see, did it show any areas of need? But even if it didn't show any areas of need, one procedural safeguard that parents can exercise that they don't always know about,
Mm,
and this is in many states across the country, right? Some, these are federal procedural safeguards, is that if parents disagree with an evaluation that's been done for their child on any area. So this could be speech language, academic, psychological. If they disagree with the evaluation and they don't even have to give a reason, although we often, say it's a good idea if you want to, but you don't have to. In the spirit of collaboration, we usually do give a reason when we're helping families. But you don't even have to. You can just say, I disagree with the evaluation. And because I disagree with the district's evaluation, I am requesting what's called an independent educational evaluation, or it's often called an IEE. And you can ask that of your school district. It's almost like a second opinion. And if that is granted, school districts really only have three ways that they can respond when a parent requests an IEE. They can, say no, and obviously they have to give you a prior written notice, or they can agree to the IEE. Most of the time, they will do that because they understand the federal obligation. And then parents can go and get a second opinion by a private provider of their choice. And then the third, I do want to mention, as I said, there's three ways school districts can respond. We really don't see this very often, but I want parents to know that it is a slight risk. I would call it a minimal risk, is that if school districts believe their evaluations were adequate, they can refuse the request. And in the most egregious situations, they can actually file a due process claim against the parent. But as I said, I have really personally never seen that in the last 10 years. And if it were even to occur, a parent could just withdraw their IE request that says, I'm asking the district to fund this private evaluation, because that's what an IEE does ask, that you want to get a second opinion, you want to pick a private provider of your choice, and you're asking the district to fund it. Those were kind of the basic components of an IEE. So if the district responded in that egregious manner, you would simply say, I withdraw my request, but it doesn't prevent you from going out and getting your own personally funded, second opinion through a private provider. So I think that's what I would probably do, Melissa, in that situation,
Yeah.
because if, they have school district evaluations, and you said that, I think that mom said reading below grade level, or dad said
Mhm.
reading below grade level, but not enough to show eligibility. So that's when I often find private clinicians go even deeper
Mhm.
and peel back more layers. And I do want to say that if you are getting a private evaluation, make sure you do share the school district's evaluations with the private provider, because they need to know what assessments were given, what forms were used. There can be a practice effect. And some of these tests have protocols for administration, like you can only give them every 6 months, or cognitive testing can only be done once a year. So
Yeah.
I think that would be a good strategy for that parent.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what that just made me think of? And there's no question for this, but we see this all the time. We
Yes.
have parents come to us who have had a private evaluation and they say, my child has a diagnosis of dyslexia, but they still were denied special education
That's
services. Do you
right.
want to talk about that a little bit
Yes,
too?
I will absolutely talk about that. I could go on all night, right?
Right?
But yeah, so that's really interesting. So again, what Melissa is saying is parents go get a private evaluation. Their child has a diagnosis of dyslexia. They try to use that private evaluation to get the child found eligible through the school district and have some kind of special education supports and services, and the school district says no. And parents are kind of dumbfounded. Like, why does this happen, right?
Yeah.
But it happens because eligibility is really what's called a two-pronged decision. So school districts usually don't, I hate to sound harsh, but they don't really care that you have a private diagnosis. What they're really looking at is, where's their underachievement, right? Like, is it
Mhm.
literacy skills? Is it reading? Is it math? Is it spoken language? And then they're looking at, what is the adverse impact that that underachievement is creating for that child in an educational setting? And I want to give one other third thing that the majority of states look at too, is there a processing disorder that helps explain that underachievement? Not every state does look at processing, so I'm mentioning that as an aside, and that's why
Mhm.
we call it a two-prong eligibility decision, but they definitely look for underachievement, and they look for that adverse effect. So what we will often see, especially in really bright kids who are, high IQ, verbal testing is very strong, verbal comprehension is very strong, but they have these below average or even average, but there are multiple standard deviations below like their thinking ability. They don't look like they have any needs, because they're average to high average and superior, yet a private clinician goes, well, that's over two standard deviations between their IQ and their decoding. That's a problem. I'm going to call that below average. So I don't want to get too technical, but private evaluators often see the adverse impact, and that's how they make their diagnoses, right, based on their clinical data, the processing, if they consider that, as well as the impact. But school teams, they don't have to look at all of those things. So,
Yeah.
I know this is not an eligibility meeting, but I do want to say to the kind folks who came tonight, we are so excited. We're going to be doing an eligibility workshop in January. So keep an eye
That's
out for
right.
that, because that is
Yes.
another area that I just feel like there's so much misinformation around. And Melissa knows it too. She was a former teacher in the public schools. And so we're going to dive into eligibility in January.
Yeah, that'll be
But
fun.
yeah, do we have any other questions though for
We
tonight?
have one more from
Yeah.
our participants
Okay.
here. This one says,
Hmm.
um, my child reads pretty well out loud, but
Okay.
their spelling and writing are really behind. Based on this new definition of dyslexia, is that enough to request evaluations or changes to the
Okay.
IEP?
Yes, 100%. So again, I want to repeat to make sure I understood. the child is reading pretty well out loud. They're really struggling with that spelling and writing. That's more of that orthographic part of
Mhm.
dyslexia, right? So that's when we say orthographic, we're really talking about the letters that represent the sounds. And if you think about the federal definition of dyslexia, and this is, at the national level under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the federal definition of a specific learning disability talks about, is there an imperfect ability for the student to read, write, spell, and it also includes do math calculations.
Mhm.
So if you have a child who's reading well out loud, but they're struggling with spelling and writing, 100%. These are, and I would just say, we all know as parents, these are basic academic needs. The school team should be very concerned about a child who is struggling with spelling and writing. And again, that's why we love this new definition from
Yeah.
IDA, because as an advocate, I've often been told, or, I've not necessarily been told, but parents have been told before they find us, oh, we don't worry about spelling. There's spell check and there's AI and there's Google Speak and all these things. But the federal definition of specific learning disability still worries about it. Parents still worry about it. And, I always say the world doesn't always accommodate. So, yes, while we have spell check and speech to text, kids have a right in the public school to learn how to read, write, and spell to the best of their ability. And
Yeah.
many of our students who have dyslexia, they need specialized instruction in order to do that. So I hope that addresses the question. And feel free to add anything on if you think you need to, Melissa.
No, no, I think that does it. All right, we have one more question now.
Sure.
Let me just do this last one,
Sure.
unless there's somebody else out there who has another question for us. We've got a few more minutes, so if you want to ask your question, put it in the Q&A now. Here's the one that we have. Our school uses a structured literacy program, but it feels very one size fits all. How do
Mm-hmm.
I ask for more individualized instruction without sounding like I'm questioning the teacher's methods? That is
Mm-hmm.
so commonly something that,
Mm-hmm.
parents worry about.
Okay, so again, I just have to make sure I'm hearing you right. I'm trying to take some notes. You said the school's using a structured literacy program. So I'm assuming
Hmm.
this child is in a general education setting, because I didn't hear anything about an IEP yet.
Right.
And they're using that one size fits all instruction.
Yeah.
And
And I think it could be a reading program for special education that may feel very one size fits all
oh,
as
okay.
well. It could be
Yeah, it could
because
be.
she's
So
asking for more individualized instruction.
yes, and she doesn't want to, I guess, hurt the teacher's feelings or
Yeah.
act like, yeah, I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
So if your child is in, I would just say a general education classroom, we do see this a lot. Maybe they're being pulled to the back of the group, or maybe they're not being pulled to the back of the group, but they're getting that one size fits all. We're addressing all their needs through this program. There's a couple of things that I would do. First of all, I would start by asking for a scope and sequence of what is actually supposed to be instructed through this instruction, whether it's gen ed or special ed. Like, what are we actually trying to teach the student? How many skills are we trying to improve upon? And then I would also ask if there's any data, any progress data to show how that's working for the student. And I say that because one of the things, again, that we're just seeing in real time since the beginning of the school year, we've got a lot of students in general ed classes that, schools are afraid to remove kids. And
Hmm.
even parents, I will say, sometimes are hesitant to remove their kids from a general education class. And we get it. But it is often in the best interest of the child for them to receive part of their day some specialized literacy intervention. But let's just say hypothetically they're in that gen ed classroom, they're getting this instruction, you've got the scope and sequence. Then you want to start asking, how's my child doing on the units of instruction? Because what we're actually starting to see is our students that we serve who have dyslexia, who are trying to make their way in a general education classroom where they're teaching some phonics and they're teaching some decoding and some vocabulary and sight words. They're going at such a fast pace. These kids are being left behind. And so
Yeah.
when we start asking, Melissa and I, we'd like to see all the unit assessments. We'd like to see their mastery checks. What we're finding out is they're like 2 out of 10, 3 out of 15, and they're just continuing to instruct beyond that point for these poor kids. So if it feels one size fit all, I want to say it may or may not be meeting your child's needs. So, definitely ask, what are you working on? And then how do you know if it's working? because all of these curriculums, whether they're for special education kids or general education kids, they are usually done in chunks and there are usually mastery checks, some type of
Yeah.
a progress monitoring. And then if that parent finds that their child is, she starts asking these questions and finds the child's really struggling, then it becomes a bigger conversation about,
Yeah.
look, my child has these gaps and I'm concerned. And again, I don't have enough information from that question to know if there's an IEP or not an IEP. But as we've given some ideas tonight, I would not back off because if your child is in a general education class, the gap's just going to keep growing farther and wider, and they're not going
Yeah.
to catch up without some kind of, intervention to close that gap.
And I think the way to answer this last part of this question, where she's worried about questioning the
Oh, the
teacher's
teacher, that's right.
methods,
Yes.
I think everything that you said is really how you alleviate that fear for the parent.
Yes.
Being able to discuss your concerns and your child's needs from a place of data. So
Yes.
it's not anything personal with the teacher. It's,
That's right.
it's all about the numbers, the assessments, what they show us.
Yes, because then, and this unfortunately happens sometimes, then you're not saying to the teacher, well, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not
Hmm.
working, right?
Yeah, right?
It's not, accusing the teacher or their methods. It's what curriculum are you using? I would love to see the scope and sequence for that curriculum. And like in certain school districts that we work in, this is public knowledge. It's on the district's website. You can
Yeah.
actually go in and find the scope and sequence for their English language arts classes. You might have to dig a little deeper and ask for the specially designed instruction scope and sequence once you find out what your child's actually receiving. But yes, it does not have to be personal to the teacher. As I said, Melissa was a teacher, and we are very empathetic to the fact that teachers do the best they can with what they've been trained to do. And too many of our teachers haven't received appropriate training on how to deliver appropriate, effective, structured literacy. So this is not,
Yeah.
and we at every presentation we always say we advocate for teacher training, we advocate for schools to continue telling teachers and not setting them up for failure. Maybe you're not ready to teach this specialized design instruction yet. You need to go through this training course first.
Right. Yep. Okay, well, that is all of our questions that we have this evening.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. We so appreciate you, as we said, hanging in there with us. We had set aside about 45 minutes. We hope you
Perfect.
found the takeaways helpful. Again, please reach out if there's anything that you need from us through a discovery call or if you want to take advantage of that IEP audit. And we just love that you're in our community. We will continue to offer some free complimentary educational sessions. We're also going to be offering some, smaller investment type workshops because we know that parents are they just definitely don't advocate every single day and they don't really know what
Mhm.
they're up against. So look for more information from us in the weeks ahead. And we hope
Yes.
everybody has a great Thanksgiving because that's coming up as well.
Yep. All right. Thank you all. Good night.